Now let's take a look at this section 1.5, which is energy interaction with Earth's surface. Now let me remind you that once the energy is emanated from the sun, it propagates through the atmosphere, forms interaction with atmospheric constituents, and reaches the surface of the Earth. What will happen if an electromagnetic radiation reaches the surface of the Earth? This is the next question that you can ask. In remote sensing, knowing energy interaction with Earth's object is very important. This is the incident electromagnetic radiation. Once it reaches the surface of the Earth, it creates three types of interaction: absorption, transmission, and reflection. So energy incident is equal to energy absorbed, reflected, and transmitted. If you divide the whole equation, or this part of the equation and this part of the equation, by energy incident, energy incident, energy incident, energy incident, it becomes what? This is 1. This is 1. And energy absorbed over energy incident is equal to, it is called what? Absorptance. Okay? Energy reflected over energy incident is called reflectance. Energy transmitted over energy incident is called transmittance. They are denoted by these symbols. Okay? Absorptance, reflectance, transmittance becomes 1. So energy neither created nor destroyed. So the sum total of absorbed, transmitted, reflected becomes 100, the incident energy. Okay? But in remote sensing, it is very important to pinpoint two most important points. One, the proportion of energy reflected, absorbed and transmitted will tell you the nature of the material type, the nature of the object. Okay? This difference permits us to distinguish different features on an image. Okay? This is one important point. The proportion of energy reflected, absorbed, transmitted will tell you the material type, which is the nature of the object. So this will allow us to distinguish the type of the material on a satellite image. Okay? And the second important point that you should note is that the wavelength dependency. The first one is object dependency of that proportion, and the second one is wavelength dependency. Now let's take a look at the same object. Let's assume the object is forced. Even if the object is the same, the amount of reflected, absorbed, and transmitted energy will vary from wavelength region to wavelength region. Okay? This is called wavelength dependency. Okay? Different objects will show you or will display different amount of reflectance at different wavelength region. For example, if your object is forced, the amount of reflected energy in the near infrared portion of the spectrum is very high than the amount of reflected energy in the visible portion of the spectrum. Okay? This is a peculiar characteristic of forced reflectance. If you see the reflectance of soil, it is different. If you see the reflectance of water, it is different. But let's fix the object. Now the object is forced. Even if the object is the same, the amount of reflected energy, absorbed energy, and transmitted energy will vary depending on the wavelength region. Okay? These are the two most important points. So try to remember these important points. What can you understand from energy interaction with Earth's object? The amount of energy reflected, absorbed, transmitted will vary depending on the object type, and that will tell you the nature of the object. The second important point is the wavelength dependency. Wavelength dependency means what? Even if the object is the same, the amount of reflected, absorbed, and transmitted energy will vary depending on the wavelength region in which you are referring to. For example, if your object is forest, for example, forest by their nature will show you there is high reflected energy in the near infrared portion of the spectrum than in the visible portion of the spectrum. Okay, these are the two most important points we will be using for identification of objects on the satellite imagery. Okay, now let's come to the very most important aspect of this lesson, that is remote sensing of vegetation. You know, based on the energy interaction with Earth's surface, when we say Earth's surface, there are different types of Earth's surface. But in environmental studies, we are interested in Earth objects such as vegetation, soil, and water. And hence, we will be studying the remote sensing of vegetation, remote sensing of forest, remote sensing of water, and remote sensing of soil, and different geomorphologies. Okay? So, when we say remote sensing of vegetation, we mean remote sensing of forest, remote sensing of agriculture, remote sensing of rangeland, wetland, and urban vegetation. Okay? After getting some idea about remote sensing of vegetation, we will be understanding the very basic concepts of remote sensing of vegetated landscapes. Okay, so remotely sensed information of growth, vigor, and their dynamics from terrestrial vegetation can provide useful insights for application in environmental monitoring. Okay, what is the benefit of knowing remote sensing of vegetation? If you know the basic concepts of remote sensing vegetation, you'll be using that information for environmental monitoring, biodiversity conservation, agriculture management, forestry management, urban green infrastructure management, and rangeland management. These are important applications of remote sensing vegetations. And in remote sensing of vegetations, it is very important to pay attention and understand the temporal characteristics of vegetation. You have to know when to select, the timing of the satellite image, matters. For example, if you select a satellite image that was taken during rainy season, for example, we know that in rainy season, the atmosphere is, the atmosphere is full of water vapor. We know that water vapor creates absorption of electromagnetic energy. This again, in turn, creates less amount of electromagnetic energy available for remote sensing, and hence no data is collected during rainy season. It is very difficult to acquire, a data during rainy season. Okay, but what is the best time for you to use remote sensing to detect vegetation is dry season. Okay, so timing is very important when attempting to identify different vegetation type, to extract useful vegetation biophysical information from remotely sensed data. Okay, and in remote sensing of vegetation, the basic idea is to know the spectral characteristics of healthy vegetation. Okay, this is the prominent figure, that you can find it everywhere in remote sensing books, textbooks. Okay, now have a look at this spectral characteristics or spectral reflectance of vegetation. Okay, what is spectral characteristics or spectral reflectance, or sometimes it's called spectral signature? Okay, so how do you remember the word signature? Signature is this one. Your signature is like this. So it is very important to identify you from somebody else. So government usually take your signature, okay, in order to identify you as Hermes or as somebody else. So it characterizes you, different from other person. So likewise, a spectral signature is the very important characteristics of vegetation. Okay, the word spectral tells you that it is related to wavelength region. Okay, the signature is going to be created as a function of wavelength region. Okay, what is the characteristics of the reflectance as compared to wavelength region? What is the reflectance amount at different wavelength region? So a spectral signature is a curve that shows you wavelength region versus reflectance. Okay? The maximum reflectance that you see is not more than 40% or 50%. Okay? Why? In the previous lesson, we have learned what reflectance is. Reflectance is the amount of reflected energy as compared to the amount of incident energy. Okay? So this is the ratio. It cannot be 100, okay? Because there are other factors, absorptance, reflectance, and transmittance. Okay? The sum total of absorptance, reflectance, and transmittance is equal to 1. So reflectance cannot be 100. If you allocate 100, the absorptance and the transmittance becomes 0. Now we are focusing on reflectance, okay, versus wavelength region. Okay, the amount of reflected energy in different wavelength range is different depending on the nature of the object. Now we have a vegetated surface. Okay, even if the object is the same, in our previous slide we have said that even if the object is the same, the amount of reflected signal in different portion of the spectrum is different. This is a very important characteristics of remote sensing of vegetation. Now let's have a look at the spectral characteristics of healthy green vegetation. Okay, the healthy green vegetation shows the reflectance at different wavelengths range. Okay, the spectral characteristics of a healthy vegetation is controlled by 3 important factors: leaf pigment, cell structure, and water content. Okay, in the visible portion of the spectrum, the spectral characteristics is controlled by leaf pigment. There are absorption bands because of chlorophyll presence. There are also peaks. Okay, while in the near infrared portion of the spectrum, the spectral signature is controlled by cell structure, whether the leaf is spongy or whether the leaf is smoothie. Okay, in the shortwave infrared portion of the spectrum, the spectral signature is controlled by water content, whether the leaf has too much water or less water. Okay, if the leaf is dried, the impact of drought on leaf will be visible in the shortwave infrared portion of the spectrum. If the leaf is dry, you will see a higher reflected signal. If the leaf has too much water content, you will see a lower reflected signal. Okay, this is very important in identification of stressed vegetation versus healthy vegetation. Now look at this spectral reflectance characteristics of healthy, stressed, and severely stressed vegetation. So when the leaf is stressed, you will see that the leaf is, the leaf can be easily dried. If the leaf is dry, this portion of the spectrum is controlled by the water content. Okay, in this portion of the spectrum, the higher reflected curve shows you that this is severely stressed and this is moderately stressed and this one is healthy. If there is no water in the leaf, that means the leaf is stressed. Okay, if the leaf is stressed, the reflected signal will be higher in this portion of the spectrum. So you can easily identify the severely stressed, moderately stressed, and the healthy one. Okay, usually what causes lower reflected signal in an electromagnetic, in the spectral signature, is the water content. If there is too much water, whether it's be it in soil or be it in leaf, it will cause to have a lower reflected signal. Water is an absorbent, okay? It absorbs electromagnetic energy. If there is high absorption because of water, the reflectance becomes higher, okay? So this is the best example to consider the temporal aspect of reflectance. In January 1, February 1, this is a 1 month difference cropping pattern, okay? If you come in January 1, it is very difficult to identify different crop types, okay? If you come in February 3, it is very difficult to identify corn from soybean and again from rice. But if you wait 1 month, you can easily identify it. So you have to choose the best time for remote sensing, okay, for identification of different crop types. And when you overlay the spectral signature of water body, vegetation, and soil, they will have distinct spectral reflectance curve, okay? This is a spectral signature for different objects. This will tell you this will help you identify different objects on a satellite image. Look at water. Water is high absorber of electromagnetic energy, okay? So you don't expect much reflectance. This is reflectance, this is not absorption, okay? So since it is high absorption, there is high absorption in water body, the reflected signal becomes very much low. Okay, there are different factors that are responsible for the change of this original reflectance curve, depending on the water content, for example. This is the original healthy green vegetation spectral signature. The relative water content of a leaf may affect this signature. If you, for example, a 5% water content of leaf and 100%, this is, as you go down to this, the amount of water content in the leaf increases. Thus, relative water content increase will show you to have a different reflectance curve. If there is 5%, that means less amount of water content in the leaf, it will cause the reflectance curve to have a higher reflected signal, okay? So this is a dried leaf and this is wet leaf, okay? Using remote sensing, especially the hyperspectral remote sensing data, such as Aviris data, you can identify the different crop types that is irrigated, okay? In remote sensing, you can identify which ones are healthy green vegetation, which ones are dried, which ones are stressed vegetation. Assume this is irrigated area, big irrigated area, using sprinkler irrigation, okay? You can, this circle is now identified in remote sensing. This is barley, this is alfalfa. Knowing this is very important to estimation of yield, to know where is less water productivity so that you can take some kind of measure to improve the water productivity and the like. So these are some of the applications of remote sensing of vegetation, okay? This is also another satellite image that is called Landsat TM imagery in 1982 in California, in US. So they have used this Landsat TM and maps the different crop types, okay? Now, in remote sensing of vegetation, another important aspect is vegetation index, or in plural form, vegetation indices. Vegetation index is a single number that quantifies vegetation biomass, okay, for each pixel in a remotely sensed image. So if you want to use remote sensing of vegetation, you have to be able to estimate vegetation index, okay? There are different vegetation index: simple ratio index, normalized difference vegetation index, and DVI. This is a symbol for reflectance. near infrared reflectance minus red reflectance over near infrared reflectance plus red reflectance. This is called NDVI. This is the most commonly used vegetation index for, in remote sensing of vegetation. There are different references. You can read those references. And also, identifying the drawback of NDVI, there are scientists who developed enhanced vegetation index also. In dry area, in arid and semi-arid area, NDVI can be used effectively, but in humid and subhumid area, NDVI is very difficult to use. In that case, enhanced vegetation index is much useful. So you can compute this, and by using NDVI or EVI, it is very important to use NDVI as an index of drought. For example, we all know that in 1984 there is a significant drought in East Africa. After the drought, there is a good condition during growing season. From June to September is a growing season. So you can see there is a well distinct condition during drought year and after the drought year. So there is this much, greenness difference between drought year and after drought year, that is good season. This is an example of enhanced vegetation index from MODI satellite imagery and NDVI. Okay. The higher the value, the good condition is. So high NDVI value indicates there is a good condition, while lower NDVI value shows you a dry condition. Okay, NDVI or EVI value ranges from -1 up to +1. The value that is around 0 shows you a water body or bareland or sparse vegetation. Okay, in between it shows you whether it is bushland, grassland, woodland. But highly vegetated areas are shown by EVR or NDVI values with values closer to 1. Okay, now let's come to remote sensing of water body. Okay, in learning remote sensing of environmental studies, it is very important to know remote sensing of water as well. Okay, the best wavelengths, which wavelength region is best for discriminating land from pure water is the first question that you ask. This will help you, demarcate the water bodies and make some kind of analysis of temporal changes of water bodies. For example, if you go to Abaya, Chamo, these are water bodies, Lake Tana, Lake Hawassa, Lake Zowai. If you want to know the temporal changes of this water body, you need to know which wavelength region is best to use. Okay, so most of the time suspended sediment will affect the original reflectance of pure water. In that case, you will have a different application scenario. For example, let me show you this. This is the original spectral reflectance curve of clean water. The amount of clay soil, if you add this much amount, the amount of reflected signal, the reflected signal will go up. Okay, this shows you the amount of sediment load, the amount of soil that is suspended in the clean water. Okay, so a reflectance of, sometimes you have this clean water. If you have too much silty soil, the reflected signal will go up like this. And this also shows you the algae laden water versus clean water. Algae laden water will have a different ups and downs, while clean water will show you a very clear reflectance. Okay, so this is the best example of wetland change in Abayaj Amo area in 1973. It looks like this in 1986 and in 2000. This is also a recent image taken from Ethiopian remote sensing satellite 1 for Lake Tana and from Sentinel-2. It shows you the extent of the wetland in Fogara area, and also it shows you the extent of the umboch, that is algae, or the aquatic plant that is very much invasive in Lake Tana. Okay, these are some of the applications of remote sensing of water bodies. Okay, we can use remote sensing of water for showing the temporal trajectory of wetlands as well as aquatic plants in order to estimate the invasive species over Lake Tana and the like. Our final topic is remote sensing of soils. Remote sensing can play a very limited role in the identification, in the inventory, in the mapping of surface soil. If it is again not covered with dense vegetation. If it is covered with dense vegetation, remote sensing plays a very limited role. But remote sensing can provide us a very useful information for knowing the chemical composition of rocks, okay? Whether there is too much iron, whether there is too much some kind of mineral. Remote sensing can also play a significant role in extracting geologic information such as lineaments. We can also estimate lithology. We can also estimate structure. Drainage patterns can be estimated from remote sensing. Okay. For example, look at this drainage pattern extracted from satellite imagery. Having this drainage pattern information, we can use this for hydrogeology, for hydrological analysis, for lineament analysis, and the like. Okay. We can also the reflectance characteristics of soil can be a function of texture, moisture content, organic matter, iron oxide content, surface roughness. So all of these factors need to be considered. Okay. This is the exercise that you need to do and submit, okay, before our next class. Here are the additional references for your consumption. This is Remote Sensing of Environments. It's a very good book, and this is journal article. This is also another very good book that you need to find and read. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me attentively.